Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 10th of August of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the northeastern part of Ukraine. We're talking about Sumy region, Chernigov region, Poltava area, probably part of Cherkasy region and Kiev region as well. So, summarizing everything, we're going to talk first of all about this territory. The thing is that since the beginning of August, the Russians intensified their activities in this area significantly. We're not talking about, let's say, a ground operation like offensive operation in the Sumy region. We're talking about drones, attack drones. We're talking about Russian intelligence operations. We are talking about missile strikes. So the biggest number of concentration icons are coming exactly from this area. The Russians attack all over the entire territory of Ukraine almost every single day, but geolocations, interesting geolocations, when talking about drone strikes, ground strikes, missile strikes are coming exactly from this area, at least since the beginning of August of 2025. So let's discuss this in details. For example, in this video we can see how the Russians on the 10th of August of 2025 managed to discover a temporary deployment point of Ukrainian special forces, and as a result of either Iskander strike or Giran strike, this temporary deployment point was destroyed, most likely with special forces inside. A bit further in the northeastern direction, in the vicinity of the city by the name of Sumy, the Russians discovered a position of S-300 air defense system. The same story. First, the Russians discovered this S-300 air defense system, and then the Russians destroyed this system with Giran drone. Another important video came to us from the northern part of Ukraine in the vicinity of the city by the name of Chernigov. As for this video, we see that the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover several barracks that Ukrainians were using to concentrate drones, most likely before using them to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. The Russians discovered this concentration, and then the Russians attacked this territory with missiles and with drones as well. And now let's go to the border between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, and here we got another concentration of videos. We discussed, for example, this video several days ago, and here we can see how Russians managed to discover command center, how Russians managed to discover a significant number of engineering equipment and different trucks, vehicles, and then the Russians launched a wave of drones that's destroyed almost every single equipment in this direction, and this video is also very important. Another video took place a bit further in the southwestern direction. Here we can see how Ukrainians were trying to deploy another mobile, let's say, point of drone operators that most likely were planning to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation with drones. But as soon as the Russians discovered this concentration of forces, they attacked this area with Iskander missile. The entire group of FPV drone operators, or just drone operators, were destroyed. And in the vicinity of the Bryansk region, we have another video where we can see how Russians, as a result of intelligence operation, managed to discover another group of special forces of the armed forces of Ukraine, probably sabotage and reconnaissance group that was heading towards the border with the Russian Federation. When the Russians discovered this concentration, they attacked this territory, and this concentration, this temporary camp, was drones and missiles. The Ukrainians suffered huge losses. So, very important concentration of very interesting videos. And it seems that the Ukrainians right now are trying to probably to build up their military infrastructure, significant military infrastructure, layered air defense systems, significant number of separate camps and temporary deployment points for special forces and sabotage and reconnaissance group that Ukraine most likely is going to use deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. A lot of mobile groups of drone operators with the same purposes that should be used to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. A lot of hangars and barracks with concentrated drones that Ukrainians can use for all these purposes. So we see that Ukrainians are building up in this direction. This is from one side. From another side, from the other side, we see that the Russians see the situation, their intelligence work in this area, the Russians control every single square kilometer, but it seems, and due to the fact that the Russians stopped completely their offensive operation in the Sumy direction, it seems that right before the beginning of talks between the President of the Russian Federation and the President of the United States of America, the Ukrainians are going to launch several very powerful provocations with the purpose to ruin this negotiation process between the Russian Federation and the United States of America. You know that these talks that are going to take place next Friday are very interesting. The most interesting detail of upcoming talks is that the Russians reduced their demands completely. For example, when talking about information that we can get from open source and basically from Zelensky himself, Russia demand just one thing. Now Putin wants to be forgiven for the seizure of the south of the Kherson region, Zaporozhye, the entire territory of Lugansk, Donetsk region and Crimea. So according to Zelensky, Russia wants just one thing. Before the beginning of talks with Trump on the territory of Alaska, that Ukraine abandon their positions on the territory of Donetsk region. So we are talking about this area. Ukrainians basically must abandon this territory and Russia will accept a ceasefire, probably very long ceasefire, that will probably at the end lead to complete end of the conflict. Just these territories, so everything inside of this red line. And telling the truth, this is probably less than 25% of the territories that the Russians demanded probably before this meeting and probably 2 or even months ago. So the question is why the Russians decided to reduce their demands so much. And if you ask my opinion, I have just one simple explanation. As for now, both for the Russians and for the United States of America, it is much more important than to continue this war to change the president of Ukraine. So if Ukraine will withdraw their positions from Donetsk and will accept the Russians to take this territory without fight, and if Russia, the United States of America and Ukraine can sign this, let's say, agreement that will settle the conflict peacefully, obviously the next thing that Ukraine should do and Zelensky should do is to organize a president campaign, election campaign. And currently, and everybody understand that most likely Zelensky will lose this president campaign, so that is why Zelensky and first of all the United Kingdom and the European countries are not ready for this scenario. So if you ask my opinion, I believe that the next week, the next 5 days are going to be very hot and very interesting, and most likely the talks process will be ruined, or so we are going to see some operations carried out under the false flag. Obviously this is going to happen, but Ukraine and its European allies will do everything they can with the purpose not to allow this meeting even to happen on the territory of Alaska. So let's wait and see. Obviously it's not this situation depends not just on Zelensky and his European allies. First of all, it depends on the will of Putin and Trump himself. Now let's discuss the situation along the line of combat contact. And first, let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates, and most of them are coming from the northeastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, but I believe that it's not correct to call this area as the northeastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Currently, it's already a clear Dobropolye direction. So we are talking about this territory. As you can see, the map has been updated since the previous day, and first of all, let's compare the map between the dates. For example, this is the situation that you can see right now in front of your screens is the situation by the end of the 9th of August of 2025. And now let's take a look at the situation by the end of the 10th of August of 2025. As you can see, according to this progress, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. The Russians answered and almost secured the village of Dorozhny, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to outflank the settlement of Novoshakhova. Some Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group managed to move even further and to outflank the settlement of Volne. The Russians managed to cut physically supply line between the villages of Shakhova and Novoshakhova. Furthermore, and the most important, the Russians managed to cut TO 515 road between the settlement of Pokrovsk, Belitska, and the settlement of Dobropolye. So, and this information and this progress today was recorded and was published by a very reliable pro-Russian resource. So, probably a pro-Russian resource maybe is not very reliable for some of you, but anyway, this is very interesting information. And a few hours later, we got another update, but this time update was published by pro-Ukrainian resources. And Deep State today confirmed partially report that was published by the Russian forces, by the Russian resources. And when talking about changes on map that were provided by Deep State, very interesting thing, we can see what they did with the gray zone. As you can see from this map, the state published very interesting progress on the ground, especially they added very huge, significantly huge contested area or the gray zone, which means that when talking about this contested area or the gray zone, most likely several or probably tens or dozens of sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed force of the Russian Federation were discovered in this area. So when talking about the map, according to Deep State, Russian units and Russian forces, more precisely the activities of Russian units and Russian forces by the end of the 10th of August were recorded in this pocket. And this is, telling the truth, very huge progress on the ground of the armed force of the Russian Federation. Telling the truth, it's very difficult to believe that the Russians managed to do something like this. And you know that this is very important because Ukrainians based their defense in the Donbas Arc area, they based their defense on several roads between the Pokrovsk agglomeration and the Konstantinovka-Slavyansk agglomeration. And since the beginning of the Russian Greatest Summer Offensive operation, the Ukrainians were using mainly the road N32. This is the road I'm talking about, to supply and support and to have some, let's say, some connections between two agglomerations using this road. And this road worked perfectly for the armed forces of Ukraine. But somewhere at the beginning of summer or in the late spring, the Russians managed to take this territory under complete control. Then Ukrainians rebuilt their logistic and they relied their logistic on this road between the settlement of Pokrovsk through the village of Rodinska, further in the northeastern directions towards the settlement of Drushkovka. But as you can see, according to the latest updates that were provided both by pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian resources, this logistic road was also cut by the Russians physically by the end of the 10th of August of 2025. Now Ukrainians have probably just one more or less reliable road to supply and support their forces between agglomerations, and we are talking about the road TO 514 between the city of Pokrovsk through the village of Dobropolye further in the northeastern directions towards the city of Kramatorsk. But the problem is that according to the latest update that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, the first sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed force of the Russian Federation were recorded and discovered on the outskirts of the settlement of Zolotoy Kolodez. As for now, it's very difficult to understand whether the Russians are planning to take this territory under complete control with the purpose to capture the village and to force the Ukrainians to fall back, or it's just an attempt to probably ruin Ukrainian defense and to force Ukrainians to get in panic. Very difficult to say. But one thing I can tell you for sure, that the distance between the settlement of Zolotoy Kolodez, where the first Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group were recorded, and the TO 514 road, the distance is already less than 3 kilometers. More precisely, 2 kilometers and 300 meters, which means that this is already nothing for the same sabotage and reconnaissance group, and it is already nothing for FPV drone operators and FPV drones. So if Ukraine lose this road between Dobropolye and the settlement of Kramatorsk-Slavyansk, this can lead to complete collapse of the entire Donbas. Furthermore, I would like to point to attention that the distance between the settlement of Zolotoy Kolodez and the border between Donetsk region and Kharkiv region is already less than 30 kilometers. So we see that the Russians are completely tasked that no matter what, no matter the progress of talks between Ukraine and the Russian Federation and the United States of America, the Russians are tasked no matter what, no matter the losses, to establish complete control over the Donetsk region. And we are talking about all these cities and towns: Lyman, Siversk, Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka, and of course the city of Pokrovsk. And we see that Ukrainians have less and less territories under their control, and the Russians are getting almost every single day better and better positions. First, the Russians will secure Donetsk region, and most likely then the Russians will start thinking whether to move further in the northern direction, but this time we're going to talk about the Kharkiv offensive operation, of course, or not. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. Of course, we are waiting for additional updates from the northeastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration or from the eastern part of the Dobropolye direction. We are waiting for geolocations. We are waiting for additional updates. And once again, I would like to remind you that the next week, obviously, we're going to see a lot. And the lots are going to come exactly from this area. Russia will do everything they can with the purpose to reinforce and to improve their negotiation positions before the next Friday. So to remove every single chances for Ukrainians to get better than the Russians' positions. But don't forget that currently something is happening at the same time in the northeastern part of Ukraine, and obviously Ukrainians will answer. They have already an answer. It's just a question whether the Russians are able to repel these possible attacks from their side. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Lyman and Siversk direction. This area is becoming the second hottest area in the area of the special military operation. Once again, we have lots of geolocations and lots of videos that are coming from the Siversk direction. Currently, we see that the Russians established, let's say, a local record when talking about artillery strikes and FPV drone attacks, and this record is coming exactly from the Siversk direction. Almost every single day, dozens of videos are being published by the Russians and by Ukrainians, which means that the Russians are focused to take the city of Siversk also during coming days. Furthermore, and at the same time, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their position significantly on the territory of Serebryanka forest. Another line of 3 lines and trenches were taken by the Russians. At least this information was confirmed currently by pro-Ukrainian resources. Furthermore, several sources reported that Ukrainian defense in the area of Serebryanka forest completely was destroyed by the Russians, and it seems that Ukrainians are going to fall back from this area in coming days, maybe even hours, towards the settlements of Yampol and Dronovka. So it seems that the battle for this forest is about to be finished in Russian favor. And of course, the Russians are finalizing their battle for the settlements of Karpovka, Serednya, and Shandrigolova in the northern flank of the Lyman direction. During the previous 24 hours, we received several changes on the ground that were published by pro-Russian and neutral resources, and according to them, the Russians are about to establish control over more than 50% of Shandrigolova to establish control over Serednya. When the Russians finish the battle for this northwestern flank of the Lyman direction, then they will be free-handed to move further in the southern direction and to begin the battle for the city of Lyman. At the same time, there are still very heavy clashes for the settlement of Zarechne, the Ukrainians introducing additional forces with the purpose to stabilize the situation. The Russians are doing the same. They're bringing more and more forces on the territory of the village with the purpose to take the initiative completely in their hands. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.